Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Liias. I'm a Roman Catholic priest. I serve as a senior priest on the staff of St. Patrick's Church in Stoneham, which is a neighboring community to Melrose, where we tape this program. Wellsprings of Faith looks at the journey of faith in a person's life and the fruit of that faith in the life of our world. Today I welcome to our program the Reverend Dr. Scott Sunquist. He is the president of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary up on the North Shore in Hamilton, and he is had a rich life as a missionary and now running this seminary, and I'm looking forward to hearing the full dimensions of his own testimony. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you for giving us a couple of hours of your life in a busy seminary schedule. You know, the real heart of this program is really conversion stories, the journey of faith, how people came to faith in Christ, and I don't think there's nothing more fascinating than all the ways that God draws people into His love. So go back as far as you want in your life to talk a little bit about your own journey of faith.
Well, Father, I was born at a very young age. I want to start there and say that.
And conceived even younger.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe. It's been a long life so far. Last month, I taught a course on evangelism and discipleship. In every class, we started with a conversion story. And by the time you get through the class, your faith is built up. You're more firmly rooted in the centrality of Christ and the gospel. And it's one of the best classes I get to teach, because by the time people come out, they come out, ready to share their faith with others because they realize the power of God's transformation. I was raised literally along the main line outside Philadelphia in a mainline church, in a Presbyterian church. And I remember by the time I was about 7th grade, I decided there was really no reason to go to church.
Were your parents, your parents are committed?
Yeah, my parents were committed Christendom people.
Yeah, they're kind of like suburban life.
Everyone
went to church.
Yeah, 70–80% of the people in our neighborhood, were away at church on Sunday. Unlike today, where nobody of the 10 houses in our street goes to church. Not one person, except for us.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so it was a different age. So we went to church, but I just didn't see the reason for it by the time I turned about 7th grade.
Nothing touched you in those earlier years?
No, it was a community. I had friends there, but I was playing sports, and that was more important to me. That was more exciting. And then something happened when I was in 9th grade. The congregation split. It got divided, and one half the congregation voted out one pastor, the other half voted out the other.
It was a real split. It wasn't just,
it was a genuine split.
It wasn't just a church plant.
No, it wasn't. It was a genuine split, and a lot of people left the church. But there was a family in there that was very concerned for their 2 daughters who were in high school and other high school students. So they invited a chap from Campus Crusade for Christ, now called Cru, who worked at the University of Pennsylvania, to come out and talk to their daughters and friends. And so there were about 8 or 9 of us. It was like September of my junior year. By then it was my junior year.
How'd you get invited?
I knew the girls. They were cheerleaders. I was a basketball player.
All right.
So it was cheerleaders, basketball players, athletes, basically.
Really?
So after about 2 months of meeting, I remember Buddy Chase asked the question, why aren't you inviting your friends? And sort of like Peter, I gave a quick answer. I said, well, why should we invite anybody else? Because we have a good group here, and you might get bad people, or people that are kind of boring or square. So we've got the cool in crowd here. And I didn't want to, I was fairly selfish at the time. And he said, well, don't you understand what it means to be a Christian? And I, again, like Peter, answered quickly. I said, sure, it's you born in a Christian family and you go to a church, and that's what it means. So he said, you think it's environmental then? That was a great answer. I said, well, I never thought of it that way. Sort of like if you're born in a garage, you're a car. And I said, well, I never thought about it that way either. And he said, no, actually, when Jesus came to earth, he presented a question to all of us. And I said, yeah, that's right. What's the question? And he said, well, the question is, will you follow me? And I said, really? He says, yeah. He collected disciples. He went around. He healed. He invited people to follow him. And he's doing that today. And I said, I'd never thought about that before. And so then he used the example of somebody walking across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. And he said, man walks across and he says, do you think I can make it? And everybody says, yeah, you can make it. He said, are you sure? Yes. So he goes across and he comes back And then he pulls out a wheelbarrow. And he says, do you think I can go across with a wheelbarrow? Sure, you can do it. And everybody cheers him on. He says, do you think I can go? He says, sure, you can do it. I says, good, get in the wheelbarrow, and then we'll go across. And it's probably a story been used millions of times, but it spoke right to my heart.
It really does.
Trust, absolute trust. Do you trust Jesus with your life? And I didn't have to think about it. I said, that's exactly what I need. I believe that Jesus is God. I need to trust my life with him. And so I went home that night, prayed the sinner's prayer, admitted that I needed Jesus and I needed to follow him, and I gave my life to him. And I remember at the age of 16, Father, that I thought when I'm twice this age, which was 32, that I will be making decisions based on the decision I made that night. Oh, wow. And there was no turning back. And so then I opened my Bible. I thought I should start reading it. And what did my eyes fall upon but Luke 9:62. No man who puts his hand to the plow and turns back is fit for the kingdom of heaven. And I said, that's it. Clearly God is affirming this decision. And then when I went off to college, I looked for colleges that had some kind of fellowship group.
So, it does seem a little bit, at least the way you describe it, awfully out of the blue, that there was like, but what, in retrospect, what, it just struck you? It just seemed so real and
I think
true?
what it was is Jesus' life was so dedicated to others in love. And
you knew that. You knew enough about the Christian faith.
Well, we studied about Jesus for 2 months.
Okay, so that was the context. It wasn't your previous life in the Presbyterian
My previous
church.
understanding of the Bible was
Nothing that you remember much about that.
Didn't study the Bible at all.
And your own family was not particularly personal about their faith.
No, they really weren't. They were people who were genuine
good people,
Christians. And they knew that their job was to make sure I went to Sunday school. I think that was sort of the Christendom model. It is environmental. You're part of that culture.
Right. Yeah. And it's sort of values and things like that. But
Right.
that sort of evangelical faith, the personal faith,
No, personal faith.
it's not even in the lingo. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I my own background was not that dissimilar. It was an Episcopal church, but there was, but again, it was the cultural, and it was particularly, it was a survival place because I was in a town called Charlestown, Bunker Hill, which was all Irish Catholics.
Yeah.
So we were this little Protestant survival network. Surrounded by Catholics who would beat me up for being a Protestant. Yeah. And I was also an immigrant. That was more my occasion, being a refugee from Germany, so they called me a Nazi. But you're right, it wasn't, in my case, I didn't have that personal thing till after I was ordained a priest. But, you at least started early.
Yeah. I think I did it the right way. I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. The Lord gets you.
An overwhelming sense that I had a different life. Right from the beginning, I knew that no longer was it just about me, but there was something I needed to do to serve others and to give back.
And it's interesting that the Lord kind of sealed that with you with that text, because obviously a lot of people have had, quote, born-again experiences. I always jokingly say, particularly as very active in the charismatic renewal, we had a lot of born-again, people born again, but we also had a lot of crib deaths. It didn't always last,
Well, I think that, I remember that so clearly. Yeah. It really did seal it, and it was something that I said, this is real. God is real. He's speaking to me. Yeah.
And so go on, and so that was...
Yeah, so I went off to college, and I was not that focused on studies. I played soccer, and Division I soccer, that takes up all your time. It's like 3 hours a day, and you're dead tired.
Where'd you go undergraduate school?
University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So I went south. And but while I was there, I got very involved in fellowship groups, and that was very helpful for me. I met my wife there. Nancy and I were in the same small group, and then we co-led a small group together, got to know each other that way, and also helping out with a youth fellowship group in her church. So I was getting involved in some ministry and thinking about leadership. I never thought about going to ministry because I didn't have good role models of pastors. And so I did not want to go to seminary. I did not want to go into the ministry.
And was your sort of, quote, church basically just parachurch campus ministry?
We went to a local church there, and it was a good church, good teaching. It was really a kind of a college church where there's a lot of good teaching, and I benefited from that. but I'd never identified with the pastor. I never saw, hey, that's something I think I could do, kind of thing. So I went into education, taught junior high for a year, and then we went off to Urbana. As I remember it, my wife doesn't remember it this way, but look, it's my life. I remember this. When I asked her to marry me, she said, well, yeah, sure, but you need to go to the Urbana Mission Conference. And if you do that, I think then we should get married. So I thought, 5 days in the cold Illinois winter.
Yeah, explain to Urbana.
The Urbana Mission Conference is a college conference run by InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And when I went, there were 17,000 students from all over the United States.
I mean, over the years, I've met so many people that conference was like a real watershed moment
changed our
in their
lives.
life.
There was a guy named John Stott from the UK who was preaching. A guy gave a call to commitment named Billy Graham. You may have heard of him.
I've heard of him, yeah.
So these were people that came there. You know, it was December 31st at midnight. The call to commitment came. My wife and I signed a card that said, I believe that if it's God's will, I will commit myself to serve overseas as a full-time missionary. And I signed that. And why did I sign that? I remember thinking there are so many needs in the world. There are people who don't have a Bible at all. And I've got 5 Bibles in my apartment. I mean, this is crazy. I've got so much. I should be willing to give my life to serve where people have never heard the gospel before. It was just very clear like that. And so my wife and I were sitting at different places, and all of a sudden I thought, what happens if she didn't sign the card? This is going to be bad for a marriage. So
this was after you were married.
Yeah, this is after we were married. So then she'd signed the card too, and then we began to look into what that might mean. Studied some things, but we were involved in a small group at that time. And
at the time you were a school teacher in your secular.
No, this is right. I taught for 1 year, and then I was on InterVarsity staff.
Oh, you were actually working
doing college ministry at the University of Virginia.
Yeah.
And there was a magazine on the coffee table from World Relief, and it said, wanted, sponsors for Vietnamese refugees. This is the 1970s.
Yeah.
And I thought, we're spending our life as Christians just talking to each other and helping one another. We're not really any good to other people. And here's an opportunity. So let's call and find out about it. So we called, and I said, I want to find out a little bit about this sponsor, what's involved. And she says, how big a family would you like? And I said, well, so I said, how big a family do we want? And my wife says, well, if they're going to live here, there can't be more than 5, which I thought was pretty generous, you know. So we're a young couple with a 9-month-old baby. And then she said, the next question she said is, would you like a husband and wife and children, or a widow with a grandmother? So there's all this choice. It's like, would you like fries with that, sir? You know, kind of thing. It's like, making an order. And I said, well, let me ask. So I asked my wife, would we like, and she says, how about a widow and children? Because I'll be here during the day by myself. I thought that was a good decision.
Yeah.
So she said, how about a widow and 4 kids? I said, yeah, sign me up.
Wow.
A month and a half later, I drive from Charlottesville to Richmond, Virginia, and there they are coming out of the airport, Hung, Hong, Nyok, Nyan, and Lin.
Wow.
A mother and 4 kids.
And this was in that period. I mean, remember the massive people
late 70s.
Escaping at the end, just as the war was ending.
Yeah,
right?
Late 70s. They had been in a refugee camp in Malaysia for about a year, and they had a plastic bag, and that was it. And so that completely changed our lives, because for a year we had in our house our baby and then a family of 5 Vietnamese, and they were lost. They didn't know the language. We had 2 different bedrooms for them. They all slept on the floor in the corner together, huddled up. And I remember the first night, you'll never forget this, our daughter Caroline was crying. She had a room by herself, this baby, and here are the 5 in the room next door. Hung, the mother, got up, got in the rocking chair, and was rocking Caroline before we could get to the room. Wow. Just mother's instinct that, there's something I can do to give back.
What happened to the father of the children?
He was shot in the war. Yeah. So he was gone, and there were a lot of widows like that escaped, and she gave away everything she had, all of her jewels, jewelry, money, to get on a boat.
Yeah.
And then they had
the
nothing.
boat people, the Vietnamese.
Yep.
And were they Christians?
Oh, no, no, no. They
No,
were
no, no.
Buddhist. They were Vietnamese Chinese.
Yeah.
They were Buddhist. Ended up, lived with us for a year, and then after 6 months, her sister-in-law from Atlanta came up with her 2 children. She was also a widow. So these 2 widows and 6 kids. We moved them into another apartment and looked after them for another 8 months or so
Wow,
after that.
wow. So this was your missionary work without going
You're
anywhere, right?
You're 24 years old,
Yeah.
and you've got a daughter, and all of a sudden you've got responsibility for these 2 widows and families. When I look back at it, I just can't believe what we did, but it completely changed our lives. After that, we were always praying and thinking about East Asia,
Yeah.
the teeming masses, as they used to say. Yeah.
Wow. And eventually you did leave and head out to foreign parts.
Yeah, we did go to East Asia. What happened was we realized the call, and now we realize the place. And then I asked about, should we get some extra training? I asked David Howard, who'd been the director,
I remember that name.
director of the big mission conference called Urbana. And I asked him, I said, do you think we should get further training before we go as missionaries? And he says, I'll tell you what Norton Starrett told me. He was a missionary in India. He said, if you get further training, you'll never regret it. If you don't get further training, at some point you'll regret it. But I'm not going to, you do what you think is best. So, I got the message. And so we decided to go to seminary where there was a good mission program. And that is the seminary
Was
where
David Tom Howard's brother?
Yes.
And Elizabeth Elliott's brother?
Yep. That was quite a family.
Yeah. It was,
And Elizabeth Elliott was teaching some classes at the seminary at that time. So I went to Gordon Conwell.
That's what brought you there the first time around. So you went to seminary there.
I went to seminary there. I'm the first alum who's the seminary president.
Yeah.
Never planned on coming back. As a matter of fact, I was only back once between 1984.
And who was it, the great missiologist, Christy Wilson?
Christy Wilson.
Was he there then?
It's interesting. He was my mission professor there. He was a missionary in Afghanistan. His son, Christy Wilson IV, is now my boss. He's the chairman of the board. And I just talked to him on the phone. So there's that connection. And very appreciative. He was one of the best, most influential faculty ever at Gordon Conwell. We have alumni gatherings. People talk about him.
Well, it was quite a, well, we're going to talk, we're doing a second show just to give a preview to people on the seminary and its whole history, its life, and sort of your vision as the new dean there and the new president. So we won't get off on those, down those details. We'll never come back.
It's a foretaste.
Yeah, but mainly so off to East Asia?
Yeah, we went to Singapore. I was planning on going to Thailand, but that didn't work out. What worked out was I did a visit in Bangkok and Chiang Mai and Singapore to do some research on theological education in Southeast Asia to prepare for what I was going to do.
Right.
And this was when I was just started my PhD program at Princeton. And so when I went there, I went to Trinity Theological College in Singapore after doing some lectures in Bangkok. And the dean met me, and I foolishly came, not knowing that it was Chinese New Year. So I came on the eve of Chinese New Year, so everybody's getting ready to leave for a week, because Chinese New Year is like the 4th of July, Christmas, Easter, all wrapped up together, and it's big. And so they said, well, why did you come now? It's almost Chinese New Year. So I talked to the dean, and he says, well, tell me a little about yourself. So I said, well, I'm Presbyterian. He says, oh, you're Presbyterian? I said, yes. And what are you studying? I'm studying church history. Oh, you're studying church history. That's great. And what denomination, what school are you in? I said, well, I'm at Princeton. Oh, you're at Princeton. And then he said, so you're at Princeton, you're Presbyterian, you're studying church history, and you said you're involved with InterVarsity? Yeah. I says, just a second. So we went back and he talked to the principal, which is what we call president, came back out, and the principal said, so you're Presbyterian? I said, yeah. And you're studying church history? Yeah. So he said, yeah. You want to teach here? I was just shocked. They were looking for a church historian focused on Asian church history, which is what I was studying. They wanted somebody who was pretty evangelical because they knew that they needed that, and many of the missionaries that came from the States wouldn't have that sort of evangelical zeal. And so I had a job.
I mean, when you got there, what were you originally going to do before you got this job?
Yeah, well, I was going to teach probably in Thailand.
I see.
But that's
Were you
about
part
3
of a
years.
mission organization that was sending you there?
With the
So they were-
Presbyterian Church.
Yeah.
They were going to send
Yeah,
us.
I see.
Yeah, and so there were certain
But
places.
again, God's provision.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you have to learn, what languages did you have to learn?
Well, all my languages are dead. Syriac, Latin, Greek, Hebrew.
So you never had to learn the local
I
language.
learned some German and French, but all for research. But
Yeah.
there, I taught in English. 2/3 of our students were English language because they're from about eight or 10 countries.
Different. So that became the common language.
Common language in
in
Singapore.
Singapore.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. So tell us a little bit about that part of your life. How many children at this point?
We had all 4 children before we left.
Yeah.
And so when we went there, they were 2, 4, 6, and 8. And we came back 8 years later, 10, 12, 14, 16.
So 8 years you spent there. in
Yeah,
the
8
mission
years.
field.
And when I went, I just assumed I would never write anything because it was so overwhelming. I taught twice as many courses as we teach in the States at that time. Plus, I was also working in a church. So after being there 6 months, a church asked me to pastor. And it was a fairly new church that was developing out of a Chinese language congregation. And so there were 400 people in worship on a Sunday, but they weren't independent yet. So I became the first pastor as it became independent. And then within a year, we were planting a new church in the Presbyterian High School. I just went back after about 35 years last fall and met the people at the main church, which now has a building, and then at the church that we planted, which has a building, and it was overwhelming. There are people that came up to me with their college age or older children who I baptized. I baptized, I think it was 58 people in 3 years.
Now, what was the cultural backdrop in that part of the world? I mean, in terms of the religious backdrop and
yeah,
other aspects.
Singapore is about 2/3 Chinese,
Chinese.
and so the Chinese have a Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucianist background. It's usually they call it Chinese religionist.
And the languages,
Mandarin, Tamil, Malay, and English.
okay.
So you can watch on television maybe 2 channels for Mandarin, 1 for Tamil, and 1 for Malay, which is close to Bahasa Indonesian. And then I think there's 1 or 2 in English. But the reason they want everybody to speak English is because they're good business people.
Yeah.
So it became a great business center and trade center.
And how did Christianity develop there? What sort of...
It's a great story.
I mean,
It's a great story. A lot of it had to do with the missionaries from China who were kicked out after Mao. They came down. Now, Christianity had preceded that,
Right.
but then there's a flood of missionaries that came down in the 50s and 60s. They could no longer go to China. The original missionaries go back to the mid-19th century.
And were the missionaries Europeans and
Mostly
Westerners?
Brits, yeah.
Brits?
Mostly Brits.
And so they weren't indigenous sort of folk?
No, it wasn't indigenous until later. Then later on, you'll have mixtures of people coming from different
later.
areas. But about the 1830s is when the first missionaries come, and there's some high church Anglicans and also some evangelical Anglicans that came to the Malay Peninsula and to the colonies there in Singapore, Malacca, and then also in Sarawak and Sabah, that whole area. So that has a similar heritage.
And is there much Islam there?
Yeah, well, Malaysia is, and Indonesia, that's the dominant. And
That's a dominant
But in
faith now.
Singapore, it's only about 12%.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, it's dominated by Chinese immigrants that came down.
So of those 8 years, tell us some of your fondest memories and moments in the life. as a
Well, I think
missionary.
one of the most exciting things for me was to learn the Chinese learning in the past was all memorization. And so there was a Chinese professor from mainland China, John Lu, and he would get in class a half an hour early, and he would literally go over to the chalkboard and start writing everything down all the way across a half an hour, and then he would teach by pointing to that, and students just copied down exactly by rote memory. And so one of the things that
And what was he teaching?
church history.
Church history.
That's the way he taught it. Just memorize the facts.
The facts, yeah.
So I come in and I try to teach students to think. And this is a new thing because you weren't supposed to think, you were supposed to repeat. And so rote memory, it goes back to the civil service exams in China. So the mindset of learning was very different. And you could always tell the people that were taught to think and evaluate and question because they were English language educated. And they were the ones, I put a joke on the outside of my door, cartoons, and if somebody laughed, I'd open the door and say, "Where'd you go to school?" And it was probably the UK. Oh. Because their exposure to the English language was exposure to a different culture, and then they would think about these things differently. Often Chinese educated would look at a cartoon and say, "Why do you have this here?" And of course, when you have to explain a joke, it's not funny.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, so that was one of the things. Another thing that was very important was to learn about other religions. So we would visit, Buddhist temples, we'd visit the mosque and Sikh temples and so forth, and to find out and to understand the core of these faiths. And one of the things that keeps coming up, and I use this quite often, is Christianity is so historical. It is so historical. When you get to Buddhism and you study the Jataka tales, the former lives of the Buddha, they're morality plays. They tell what the Buddha did in an earlier life, but it's basically to help you learn how to live. Right. And so many religions have that, or they're just ritualistic. You've got to do certain things, and you've got to do whatever you want to afterwards. You just have to make sure you take care of that god, or that goddess, or that demon. And you take care of them, then you do what you want. But Christianity, it's all interwoven, the historicity, the ethics and morality, all through grace and forgiveness. And it just, I guess I feel very blessed to have this understanding of Christianity that many people don't, because you just within this Christian mix.
Yeah, and relative, yeah. And it is. I mean, the myth made history, as it,
Yeah.
But the reality, the Word made flesh and incarnate.
Yeah. Well, another thing was interesting. Talking about interesting things, I did about 50 or 60 weddings in 3 years. Now, I have a lot of friends here that do that many funerals, but there, the church was growing. The average age of my congregation was 23, and 93% were converts. So, whenever I did a wedding, every single time I'd be standing in the back, I'd come up with the groom, and the groom would say, "Oh, Pastor, could you make sure you give an evangelistic message?" As if I hadn't planned a message. But the idea was most all of their family and friends are non-Christian because they're converts. And so this is an opportunity, they come to church, and it's an opportunity for them to hear the gospel.
Wow. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, and we haven't got you. You're off. How old are you now? You're in your 30s or 40s?
When I went there, I was 33, because I figured, well, Jesus was dead, and I'm just starting. And so I left when I was 41.
I mean, there's so much to having, I've had a few forays into foreign countries, and I came from one, although Germany's not exactly missionary. Well, it is now.
It is now, yeah.
But the sense of, what draws people to the gospel, particularly out of a backdrop, a different culture. It's fascinating. And according at least to reports we hear, Christianity in places like China, even communist China, is growing.
It continues to grow, and I think the Chinese government helps it some by these intermittent persecutions.
That's right.
It purifies the church, and we have many contacts in China, and they're constantly looking for help. They're developing apps, they're developing networks of training, and it's remarkable how it continues to grow.
Well, I suspect, I know that you went from that into education and teaching, and now you're president of Gordon Conwell, which is one of the great seminaries of our nation, and with a wonderful missionary missionary dimension. So a lot of that is good stuff. We actually are going to talk about your seminary. So tell us one thing about the life between your time in the East and how you...
Yeah, I can make it quick. We came back because within 2 weeks I had 4 requests to apply for jobs in the States, which was unbelievable, being a white male missiologist, who's really looking for that. But 4 different seminaries, and ended up going to Pittsburgh Seminary, which is a Presbyterian, and taught there 17 years, mostly history and 1 mission course a year. And then I was the dean at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena for 8 years.
Which is kind of a sister school.
Yeah, right. And then came back in 2019.
Well, good. We got you where you are now.
All right, and here I am.
Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful journey in life, and we'll look forward to see what God's got for you.
Thank you very
now in
much.
this next stage of your life. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, this kind of rich journey with Dr. Sunquist through his life and his faith and his work as a missionary. And we'll be spending some more time with him to talk about Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Thank you, and God bless.